What made Americans kill each other? How did a country founded on the principles of freedom and equality end up in a civil war? And what lessons can we learn from this tragic experience? Today, we will try to find answers to these difficult questions by examining the causes, course, and consequences of the American Civil War. In 1861, the bloodiest war in the history of the United States began. The enemy did not come from outside. It was a civil war between the northern and southern states. Why did more than 600,000 people die? What did the Southerners want? And what did Lincoln want? What consequences did this war have for the history of the country? All this is in this article. Prerequisites and causes of the conflict. Every school child, both in Russia and in the USA, knows that the main and only reason for the Civil War in the USA was slavery. And here we immediately encounter the main myth, because this conflict has several causes, some of which are not directly related to slavery. When the USA was formed in the late 18th century during the war with England, the states concluded a number of treaties, including the Constitution. This was done so that the states would be a single mechanism in the fight against a common enemy. Soon differences began to emerge between the states in the way they governed and ran their economies, in the formation of economic institutions, etc. These problems became especially acute when the U.S. government began pursuing a protectionist policy in the first half of the 19th century. Industrial goods from England were heavily taxed, so Southerners were forced to buy goods from the northern states. At the same time, they were prohibited from raising prices for agricultural products. And if we add to this the increase in taxes for the southern states, we get a high level of social tension. Slavery was an important problem in the South. These lands were agricultural. There were huge fertile plantations, where slaves from Africa had been used since the 17th century. As the American historian de Tocqueville wrote, slavery becomes disastrous for the master. For the North, the Southern model of economic management had no prospects. In order for the United States to exist as a single state with a modern economy, it was necessary to get rid of slavery. Here it was not so much about humanism as about the country's economy. The Republican Party, led by Lincoln, advocated for the joint integration of the states as well as the abolition of slavery. When Lincoln's victory in the presidential election was announced at the end of 1860, the southern states declared a protest. Then a decision was made, guided by the right to secede, to leave the United States and form their own state. In February 1861, the southern states declared the creation of the Confederacy, headed by President Jefferson Davis. This is 40% of the country's territory. In order to hold the United States, it was necessary to show force. Lincoln began to prepare for war with the South. It is noteworthy that the journalist Karl Marx followed the events in the United States. Already in 1861, he wrote an article in which he noted a fact that is important for historians today. It was not the North that started the war, but the South. At the end of the article, he makes an important conclusion. Slavery, the root of all conflict, would have been the source of continuous hostility, discord, and strife, so the situation that arose in 1861 was inevitable. Key events. During the war, more than 2 million soldiers were mobilized into the Union Army and more than 1 million into the Union Army. The most famous battles on land. Battle of Shiloh, 1862. Victory of the Union, led by General Ulysses Grant. Battle of Seven Pines, an unsuccessful attempt at a counteroffensive by the South. As a result of the defeat, Robert Lee, one of the most famous soldiers from the slave states, became the new commander of the Union Army. Battle of Chancellorsville, 1863. The first major defeat of the Union Army, the South goes on a serious offensive, which is stopped as a result of the Battle of Gettysburg, 1863. Battle of Atlanta, a series of battles and engagements in 1864, ending in victory for the North. Siege of Petersburg, a decisive series of battles from the summer of 1864 to March 1865. Battles at sea, the capture of New Orleans by the North in 1862 under the command of David Farragut. The Battle of Hampton Roads is the most famous naval battle of the Civil War. It was the first battle involving ironclad ships. From April to June 1865, some parts of the South surrendered. In June of that year, The war was officially over with the victory of the U.S. Army. Consequences of the war. It is noteworthy that Lincoln did not see the surrender of the South. In April 1865, he was mortally wounded by one of the supporters of the Southerners. So the emergence of political terrorism is one of the consequences of the American Civil War. In order to modernize the economy of the slave states, the Reconstruction of the South was declared. In order to prevent former slave owners from causing problems, Confederate Army veterans were prohibited from holding public office. After the Reconstruction of the South, agricultural management was modernized and factories and plants began to appear. Some Southern veterans could not come to terms with defeat. Among them was Nathaniel Forrest, who created the Ku Klux Klan in late 1865. This organization became a symbol of violence and racism in the United States. They unleashed terror not only against the black population, but also against the Republicans. More than 600,000 people died in the Civil War. Some will say that this is the price that Americans paid for the abolition of slavery. Others, for maintaining the unity of the country. One thing is clear. In the form in which the United States existed before 1861, they would not have lasted long. The difference in political and economic systems gave rise to many conflicts, and slavery became the core of these disputes. A phenomenon alien to freedom and democracy, something with which it was impossible to build a modern state with a market economy. The Civil War is over, but the scars it left on the body of the American nation have not healed to this day. Remembering the victims, understanding the reasons, and learning from this tragic page of history is our duty to the past and the guarantee of a peaceful future. Let this history be a reminder of how fragile the world is and how important it is to preserve unity. Subscribe to the channel to not miss educational stories and like